I can't turn the teacher off in me, so if you do have a copy of the meeting minutes or the agenda, if you haven't had a chance to read through it, this would be a good time so that when we call this to order and we start looking to approve, you guys can see if there's any edits that you found. His needs to translate. So to be respectful of time, we're still having a few issues with the live stream, and Kayla is working that out, but we're going to go ahead and get started. And I would like to welcome everybody who's here live. We have about 14 people here. And then those of you who are joining on technology, we appreciate that. And we just want to make sure that everybody knows that if you want to put something in the chat, or if you turn your speaker off to engage verbally, that would be wonderful. We are going to go ahead and get started with calling the meeting to order and doing roll call. Do you have a list? Oh, Kayla has the roll call list on her computer, so give us a second. As with most things, good things come to those who wait, correct? I am going to start calling names. If you can unmute and let us know that you're present, we would appreciate that. I apologize in advance if I don't say somebody's name correctly. Jennifer King. Okay. Keith Piney. All right. Barney Pontius. Brandon Gay.
Here, good morning.
Thank you. Jennifer Kaczynski. Jennifer Kurth.
Here.
Thank you, because I'm like, I don't know.
You're
how to
welcome.
mark.
It's okay.
Laura Thompson. Lena Kisner.
Here.
Marvin Miller.
Good morning.
Matthew Ramsey. Michelle Warner.
Good morning.
Paul Buck. Rebecca Schultz. Sabrina Rischel. Hope I said that right. Tobias Wood. I'm present. Dr. Pitcher or Pitch.
Good morning.
Did I say that correctly?
You got it the second time. Thank you.
Thank you. Whitney George.
I'm here.
Lindsay Graff.
I'm here.
Winfield. Okay. Okay.
Present.
We're familiar with cats and
And then we have two interpreters. I see Kim and Mary. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Jim McNeese. Leslie Gerard.
Hi, everyone.
Mike Burgess. Rocky Nichols. Ashley Enns.
Here.
John Harding, and Luann Barron. Okay, and then our KSDE staff, Bert Moore.
Present.
Shanna Bigler. Carrie Rogers.
Here.
Lori Curtis. Christy Cotton.
Here.
Kayla Love.
Present.
Brian Dempsey.
Morning.
Julie Rands. Alicia Nichols. Yeah, did I say your first name right? Okay. Carrie Haig.
Here. Good morning.
Thank you. Dean Zykes. And Josie McClendon. Shane Carter. All right. Okay, so it appears that we have 14 voting members today, which means we do have quorum. I'm not sure that we have many actionable items, but the quorum is 11 and we have 14, so we can proceed if we need to. I'd like to welcome everybody for attending in your time, and I know that it's really hard to get coverage and do the wonderful things we're going to do today. So if we could have somebody make a motion to approve the agenda for today, I would entertain that motion.
Hi, Trish, this is Marvin Miller. I will go ahead and make a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
Okay, thank you, Marvin. And a second? Okay, we have a second with Ms. Schultz. All right. Are we going to send a poll out to vote on that? Kayla's just multitasking away. I wish you guys could see how hard she's working. I think Bert is going to have to give her a vacation day. Oh, she said she's off tomorrow, so she's already getting one. So if you could go ahead and vote. All right, it looks like it has been approved. The second order of business is to take a look at the minutes from the September 15th meeting. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes from the September meeting?
Trish, this is Marvin Miller again. I'll go ahead and make a motion to approve the minutes from the September meeting with great thanks to Kayla for putting all these together.
I
Agree.
second Troy Pitch.
Troy Pitch is seconding. Marvin made the first motion. Do we have a poll for that? All right, it looks like we have approval for the minutes and we will move on. All right, our first order of business is public comment. 9:15, we are a little behind schedule. Kayla, do we have anybody who submitted a request for public comment? Okay, we do not have any requests at this time. Do we need to move on?
I don't know.
Okay, I don't think we have to vote on that. All right, so the next item is member reports. We're going to catch up on our time schedule here real quickly, hopefully. This is a new feature that when we met with leadership, we felt like we should add, because sometimes there's people that aren't on the agenda. So if there's anybody not on the agenda that would like to give a quick update as to what's going on out there in the field, then we would love to hear from you. We'll give this a few minutes.
Trish, this is Marvin Miller. I'll just go ahead and fill time for a minute. The I attended last weekend or Thursday and Friday the special ed law conference up in Omaha, and I know a few others attended as well. I just want to say thanks to Bert Moore for being on that planning committee and putting together a great event. There are quite a few people there. I came away from that conference, number one, glad to be back in person with a lot of people because of those conversations that you get to have. And two, I
Mhm.
walked away learning a lot of stuff. So that's always a good thing. So just again, thanks to Bert, and it's good to be back in person on some of our events again.
Thank you, Marvin. That's really wonderful news. We thought this is a great chance to showcase some positives, and I'm a representative of the youth who are incarcerated or who are in the Department of Corrections. And so my update is we are getting ready to have our graduation in December, and we are going to have 20 plus graduates in December who are going to be able to bring family members and have a ceremony. And ceremony is so important, especially for them to be able to come together and do something very positive. We have a few who are still right there on the bubble, and they've got a week or two to finish, and we're hoping that the number will be even more.
Trish, Marvin Miller again. I'm going to brag on one of my students. Can I do that?
Definitely.
For those of you that do not know, I teach a secondary special education in a communication disorder autism focus room, and one of my students will be given the Infinitec Technology Award for improving communication with his tablet communicator device. So that award luncheon is coming up in December. So I'm proud of him and all the team that works with him.
That's wonderful, Marvin. I didn't know there was such an IT award, and what a great thing for us to be showcasing some assistive technology. That's wonderful. Anybody else? Okay, our next order of business is introduction of our new SEAC members. So we have Lindsay Groff, who is a new member. She was brought in because she has a lot of characteristics that are definitely going to benefit our team here at Special Ed Advisory Council. Bert, do you want to speak a little bit more about Lindsay?
If we don't get an echo.
Okay, I will mute mine. Go ahead.
Okay, we're still echoing.
Yeah.
Are we okay now?
Oh boy, that's not good. Go ahead.
Okay, we're gonna get a little echo probably, but Lindsay has been working in Burlington at the Coffee County, a special ed cooperative for several years. I know that I worked with Lindsay personally when we stole the director and brought that director to West Elk, and then Lindsay ended up with the director position. Lindsay meets the majority, so she does have the disability characteristic. I believe you have a child, Lindsay, that has a disability. And so when we looked at our 16 candidates, we decided that the candidate that met the majority rule would be the candidate selected because she met all the requirements that are standing in the application. And I'm sorry you're getting this echo, but Lindsay, welcome to SEAC, and you might want to tell them a little bit about you.
Well, thank you. I'm excited to be a part of the group. Can you guys hear
Want me
me?
to turn
Okay.
mine on? Okay.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear
Yes,
you.
we
We
can.
get a little bit of an echo, but
Yeah, Bert, if you mute yours, then mine may take over.
Once you get it as individuals or.
So just glad to be a part. And like Bert said, I've been in the business now for 22 years. So I'm excited to share my knowledge, but learn a lot from everybody here on this team too.
Kind of look through what's available on that website.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. And then another discussion that we had was making sure that we have a representative from the state schools. And after a great amount of conversation, we decided, since they are deemed as part of the state agency, that we are going to welcome members from the Kansas School of the Deaf and Kansas School of the Blind as ex officio members, like we do some of our other members, so that they are willing to participate and welcome at every SEAC meeting. And then we can include them at the end of our meetings when the ex officio members report out. We wanted to make sure that they had a seat at the table and that they were being seen and heard. All right, so I'm not sure what just happened there, but we had something drop. Oh, our cord. So if you lost a live stream or if you lost something, we're going to get that back up in just a moment. Technology is just trying to battle against us, but I'm determined we're going to win this fight today. So the next item on our agenda is the graduation task force update. Jim McNeese, have you joined? I don't see him on here. Okay, we do believe he's meeting at the Kansas Board of Education today. So one of the things we have not submitted, we've submitted recommendations, but we have not had our official meeting as the graduation requirement task force. I sit on that committee as well. And we do know that we are not changing the requirements of 21 credits for all high school graduates, but we just wanted to make sure language was clear and pushed out to all districts that even if a kid doesn't have an IEP, if a kid needs to be given permission by the local district to graduate with the 21 requirements, as opposed to districts who add extra requirements because they want their students to get experience and exposures, that language is clear, that all kids, whether IEP'd or not, are eligible to use the 21 credits that Kansas requires for graduation. And a few other things we were trying to clear up is we wanted to make sure that we added the financial literacy piece and a digital citizenship piece. So traditionally there are 6 elective credits, and one of the conversations we're having is there will still be 6, but 1 whole credit of that would be designated as a half credit of digital citizenship and a half credit of financial literacy. So we're surveying the field still a little bit more on that, and work is still being done, but we have not been able to meet in front of the board to make that recommendation. So a lot of what we have done is fine tune the 21 credits and make them user-friendly. I really feel like the special education population has been very well represented, because a lot of conversations were geared towards how do we make this equitable for our students who need to get out experience and get exposures and do work study, and how do we work with pre-ETs or voc rehab or transition coordinators or work coaches, so that everyone has equal access to those experiences and exposures, whether they're transitioning to the world of work or to their college and careers. So those conversations are very robust, and they do not happen overnight, but they are continuing. And I look forward to bringing our recommendations for the Board of Education to approve. Does anybody have questions? If you ever have suggestions of items you would like to make sure are considered in that, don't hesitate to email me or Jim McNeese, because we want to make sure we look at this from every lens. Okay, so we are now ahead of schedule. So at 10:10, we were supposed to be hearing from Brian Dempsey. And Brian, are you ready? Do you want to go ahead and jump in? I'm looking across the table, which is such a nice thing. So if you guys see me looking around, which is the Zoom version of me canvassing the room, that's what we're doing here. So Brian's here, and we're going to go ahead and let him get started on his presentation on SPP and ARP or APR. I'm going to mute and we'll let you join the volume.
Thank you, Tricia. Good morning, everybody. We talked in September about SPP APR, and I went through kind of what all the indicators were, what that was, where our data was from our FFY20 submission. And we reviewed the slippage and the analysis that KSDE conducted there. And I thought we'd touch base today, not to go over that again. I reviewed the minutes and they're pretty detailed in there. If you have any questions, you can reach out to me, but give you an update of where we're at in the process. As you know, the submission for FFY21 is due by the end of January, or by February 1, 23, and we will submit it the end of January. We are in the process of gathering our data. OSEP has released the template for this submission, and the leads are getting their data as it comes in, and they're filling out those templates, and we will meet in a couple of weeks, and then again in December to review those as a team, to do the analysis for those areas that we have slippage, and to put the final touches to get ready to submit it in January. So I will come back in January and go over in detail all of the indicators. Lindsay, I don't think you were here in September. If you have questions about this process, if you want to reach out to me, I'm glad to set up a time to go over that with you. The other thing I wanted to touch base on was differentiated monitoring and support from OSEP, their general responsibility to monitor us as we do the LEAs. And we are in cohort 2. We remain in cohort 2. We did learn that our on-site visit, let me back up. Again, the minutes are pretty detailed and reflect what that process is and all the protocols that are involved in that and what we are looking at internally at this point. We did learn that our on-site visit, which they're calling the engagement, will not occur until September 2024. So 2 years from this last September, a year from the next September. And I know we think that's plenty of time, but that will go by really fast. So we are not pausing. We are continuing, as I talked to you about in September, where we have gathered a core team now, an internal core team, to start to put everything together to tell Kansas's story, to figure out where our language is a little bit different from the IDEA, as every state has that. So as we start working with stakeholders and with you all, you know what the terms, if OSEP comes in and they're asking questions, what terms they use is the terms that we use. So we'll put all that together for you. And also, so we're doing that internally. We'll reach out to partners as well. But the other thing we're doing with our federal liaison, probably after the first of the year sometime, is start just a high level review of kind of where we're at and what's going on. I think we're going to start with the fiscal component with Dwight Thomas, who's our federal liaison, and do that sometime in January. Or February, but we'll be ready for that. And that'll help us prepare for the onsite as well. In the meantime, our federal partners are probably looking at our website as well, looking for information. So I think as we work internally and work with you, and as they get ready for September 24, they'll be reviewing the website as well. And as questions come up, I think Dwight will reach out to us. He's on our team as well. So that'll help us get in a good position as well. So with that, if there are any questions, I think people are just excited to hear from Mark, and we're really going through the agenda, but he's not going to be here till after lunch. So if there are questions, I'm happy to answer them, but that's kind of where we're at. Everything's in the minutes. If you have any questions, just reach out to me and I'm happy to review them with you or answer them.
All right. Thank you so much, Brian. Just wanted to let you know we have a break scheduled, but I think that since we're an hour ahead of schedule now, we can go ahead and skip the break unless people want the break. Okay, Bert is willing to jump in right now and talk about the annual report. So we're going to go ahead and give him the floor to do that.
And hopefully I don't get echoes this
No, I
time.
turned mine down. Hopefully we'll be good.
All right. Well, what I wanted to share with you is that we sent the annual report to you I spent 3 weeks working on this report. I took every event that we did last year and I put it in an Excel spreadsheet. And then I went through all of the indicators from the Federal Reporting Index, which you'll see in the box squares towards the end of the report. And I plugged in for each of those indicators where we had met that requirement or discussed that item. So it's a draft form. It's for you to go through and review, but it was meticulous to make sure that I caught everything in the minutes. And I'm so glad that our minute takers last year were very clear and clean in what they described. I also had my notes, and then I put that together because in the past, I was not happy with how we did the report. We put every meeting date for every indicator, and I knew that wasn't accurate. So I wanted for anybody to pick that up, we know who did the report and what the date of the report was, and a brief description of what was discussed. So when you go through the annual report, we have the secretary's letter, and then I bulleted the major points that we discussed during the entire year, because we normally do that in our report. This report does get put in the file and it will be reviewed by OSEP when they come to visit, or when they go online and look at our exhibits before they come. So I have my letter that I always do. Then we have our Special Ed Advisory Council. I have reduced that and I have narrowed the scope on that and combined some items because we were being redundant. And so I'd like for you to read that. And then we've got the state board because we want to be sure that we have their goals and mission and vision expressed. The council membership as it stood last year, which I really like, it shows the majority. And it shows the state board regions that are represented, which for some reason or other, our state board is very possessive. They make sure that they have representation on SEAC. And then the council leadership, along with our meeting dates and our operational standards, and then our accomplishments. Now, this is a general summary that just bullets out what we really worked on. You'll remember we did a lot in SPPAPR, a lot in the differentiated monitoring. Licensure was a topic that seemed to be a recurring in every meeting. The graduation task force was mentioned in here. Our joint committee meeting with the state ICC. And I'll talk to you about an idea I have on that in a few minutes. And then we get into the summary of activities by priority area. So please take some time, go through and review that at your leisure and give us feedback on what you think. I know it's a long document, but it has to be to meet all the requirements. So that's why we snuck this in this meeting, because last year you didn't get it until January when we were ready to approve it. Then when I was trying to draft this year's, I thought this isn't the right way to do this. And so I tweaked it and then came up with the boxed areas of focus, the data and the data completed, so that anybody that picks this up can know what we did and when we did it. That's the simple description of this process, that we go to the state board in January and they approve it. So just to let you know, we approve it, but we take it to the state board too. And that will more than likely be Trish and I, and any volunteers who would like to sit with Trish are welcome. I'm sure your hands are all going to be up, but it's a fun time because this board has been very generous and very complimentary of what Special Advisory Council has worked on. Jim McNeese brags about Trish and her engagement with the graduation task force. So are there questions that are in the chat that I haven't seen?
I noticed in the chat, we have a lot of thank yous to Brian, but I do believe we have a question. Somebody had asked, where do we find that? If you got the email from Kayla, it is one of the attachments that she put on the email, and Bert apologized because it's lengthy, but I do think that it is very well done. And I love, sorry, we're reverberating.
Not me. I keep picking.
if only one of us can have our volume up.
This thing, it's all
Yeah.
down and it's still.
Yeah.
on.
So I'm just gonna talk loud enough so that they can hear on yours. Can everybody hear? Can we get a thumbs up? Okay, so I have a loud enough voice. I think we'll be fine. So the packet is on the email that Kayla sent out, and I really do appreciate the way you redid this. It's very clear. I think it streamlined it. I do have a question. Did we start during this year, the transition coordinating council? Because I've just glimpsed through it and I haven't seen much in here.
I believe you'll find it in the information.
Okay,
When we discussed it,
okay.
and it should be under the transition section of the indicators.
All right, because Stacy's done a lot of work on that. I sit on that committee and she's doing some pretty impressive things there. So I want to make sure we don't leave her out.
Sure, yeah, we've got it on 3.2C.
3.2C.
Transition coordinating.
Okay, good deal. If anybody has any edits or suggestions, please send those to Bert. We want to make sure that we're not here to be right, but get it right. We want to make sure before we go present that we get as much right as we possibly can. So when they start asking questions, we have the information that we need. Any other questions from anybody else?
Trish, this is Marvin here, and I guess this question might be for Bert.
Okay.
Bert, I
The
like
next
the
item on our agenda is talking about licensure. Oh, Ashley, I see a hand. Can you unmute?
I don't think you can hear us.
Hold on a second.
I was waving on behalf of Marvin.
Oh, okay. Marvin wasn't on my screen, so I appreciate it. We've gotten our
Oh.
volume thing figured out. So go ahead, Marvin.
Okay, hey, sorry about that, Trish.
No, go
I
ahead.
really wish I could have been up there in person. The got a question sort of for Bert on this, and I'm going through this real quick here. I really like the way it's set out,
Mhm.
and I looking at pages probably 10 or 11, 12, the council accomplishments. And I briefly reviewed these. Were there anything that we gave drafted language and gave recommendations to the board? I know we provided feedback, we collaborated, we did some things. And I might have my years confused now during these 3 years of COVID, where we discussed regulatory changes or proposed different languages, like ESI stuff we probably did 3 years ago. I just want to make sure that there's something like that. If there was, you probably got everything in here. I just didn't see a whole lot of if we had created motions, I guess, for the state board, unless that's included under feedback and stuff. Does that make sense?
We really didn't. We did provide the feedback on the legislative bills, which is in, I think I'm reading it in 3.1Q. But we had information that we provided relative to the.
And we can't hear you, Bert. I'm sorry.
Okay, I'm going to turn my volume down and let him turn his up because he has a really good answer for you.
The two things that we discussed, I believe last year, Marvin, were the 22-year services for 22-year-olds. And then we
Okay,
talked
cool.
about a teacher education incentive program. And I believe I've got them both listed in here somewhere. I can't find them right off, but I know that
You probably do. They just didn't pop out at me. So I'm sure they're in there. I just wanted to make sure they were, that's all.
yeah, those were the two that we recommended to the state board.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you, Bert. Great work on this.
Okay, do we have any other questions? All right, we are cruising right along. We have Shane Carter still on the agenda to speak, but I believe he's going to be here in person. So we want to give him till 11 o'clock. It's not fair to try and ask him to present on a phone in a car, maybe on his way. He's got a great presentation for us, I'm sure. But Carrie Rogers is here and we've checked in with her. Her presentation at 110 is a little bit different than the part that Beth Foltz is going to present. And Carrie has said that she's willing to go ahead and present. So we're going to jump ahead to that.
Would you let Marvin know it's 2.1C?
Marvin, Bert found it and he said he wanted you to know it's 2.1C. He gave you a thumbs up. All right, Carrie, go ahead.
Okay, good.
Do you want me to turn it down? Woo. There you go.
Okay, good morning. Hey, are you going to advance the slide? Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, so I am giving an update on the 1% threshold, which has to do with the alternate state assessment for students with the most significant cognitive disability. So the Every Student Succeeds Act, which was enacted in 2016, is where that 1% comes to play. So 34 CFR 200.6 states that a state may not prohibit an LEA from assessing more than 1% of its assessed students using an alternate assessment based on alternate academic achievement standards. However, the state is required for the LEA that assesses more than 1% of their population using an alternate assessment to submit justifications for that need to exceed the 1% threshold. In addition to that, states must provide appropriate oversight for each LEA that is required to submit those justifications. And we have to make those justifications publicly available. So they are posted on the ESSA website for KSDE. And we have those back from, I think, 2017-18. We do have to make sure that there's no personally identifiable information in those. So we redact any that we might see, but we do ask when those justifications are completed to ensure that you don't have any of that personally identifiable information. One of the things that we added few years ago was the assurances. So if a state submits a waiver to test over 1% of their students with an alternate assessment, the LEAs have to provide assurances that they're following the state's guidelines for participation in the alternate assessment. So this is the regulation that I mentioned earlier, 34 CFR 200.6. And basically it is stating that for those students with the most significant cognitive disability, the state can adopt an alternate they can adopt alternate academic achievement standards, which are our DLM essential elements, which are actually performance standards. They're aligned to the content standard. They're performance standards that are at reduced depth, breadth, and complexity. And then we can have an alternate state assessment based on those performance standards. One of the things that is required with that is that the state has to, we had to develop a definition for most significant cognitive disability and appropriate guidelines. So in the last several years, when we submitted our first waiver and plan, we went ahead and developed that definition, and we updated our participation guidelines several times to make them clearer to the LEAs of, who are those students with the most significant cognitive disability. Another thing that this affects, since it affects both district and state assessments, with the dyslexia legislation that where KSDE requires for districts to submit data on that early literacy data, we had to develop an alternate early literacy screener. So I went ahead and had a webinar back in September, and that screener was posted. It is intended for those students in kindergarten, first and second. It does go up to the third grade, but Kansas only requires those scores to be submitted in K-1-2. So those are the students that will need to complete that alternate early literacy screener. Okay, so there is a question, if a child doesn't qualify for the alternate state assessment, is there an opportunity for parents to opt out of their child taking the state assessment? So one of the things, there is an SC code, a special circumstance code for parent opt-out that is available. When that happens, that does count against the district and the building for accountability purposes because a student counts as not being tested, but that is an option. So one of the other requirements with alternate assessments is if an IEP team determines that a student needs to take an alternate state assessment, there are 2 why statements that the team must provide. They must answer why the child cannot participate in the regular assessment and why that particular alternate assessment is appropriate for the student. So that is actually one of the questions we look at in IDA and gifted file review. We have question 17 that actually ask that. Did you follow the state's participation guidelines? And then if the student took an alternate assessment, are both of those why statements included in the IEP? So this is what our data shows. As far as the 1%, for school year 17-18, we were at that 1.14, 1.16. Science was actually under the 1%. We were pretty consistent in 18-19, although science went over the 1%. The federal government, when considering the 1%, they use standard rounding. So anything at 1.05 is considered over the 1%. 19-20 assessments were canceled, even though most of our students taking an alternate assessment did complete that fall test window and part of the spring window. We had no general assessments, so we have no data for that. And then 2020, 2021, our numbers were actually under the 1%, but we did not feel that we could rely on those numbers. That was the year that we had some of our districts that still had students attending virtually, and we did not have a virtual option. So our percentages were a lot lower, but our participation was also a lot lower that year. For this past school year, I do have that data. I didn't get it added in the slide in time, but our ELA participation is 0.94%. Math was 0.94, and then science was 0.87. So we are under the 1%, which is very exciting because we've done a lot of work on getting there. And I really feel that those numbers are accurate for this year. So talking a little bit about the history of what Kansas has done with plants and waivers. In June 2019, we did receive a letter from the U.S. Department of Ed saying that we are out of compliance, and that was because our numbers were over the 1%. And they required us to submit a plan, which we submitted in July. I think they gave us 30 days. And then we went ahead and submitted a waiver in August once we had sent that through public comment. That was approved. And then in June of 2020 and June of 2021, we requested waiver extensions. One of the requirements of submitting a waiver is you have to submit it 90 days prior to your test window opening. Well, our test window opens in September. So that means we are submitting our waivers before we actually have finalized data. So our waivers are actually weren't approved usually till December or January. That's because Department of Ed was waiting on our finalized data. Like I indicated, we're under the 1% for 2022, so I did not submit a waiver. So with the justifications, as I indicated, the regulation requires that districts that test over 1% of their students have to submit justifications. So one of the things we did a few years ago is we felt it was really important to provide the districts with the data that we have, so they weren't trying to figure out for themselves what their data show. So what we provide is the number and the percentage of students per subject that are taking the alternate assessment. We give them data for each subject on the disability category. So they can see exactly how many students in each disability category are taking the alternate assessment. The participation by subject subgroup is what we use for disproportionality. So if a district has disproportionality in the subgroups that are taking the alternate, they must address that disproportionality, and that's part of the regulation. And then we also provide the percentage of students that are performing at target or advanced on the alternate assessment. The reason for that is if you've got students that are performing at target or advanced, you really need to be digging into those reports further to determine if this is the right assessment for your student. With the disability categories, we want them looking specifically at specific learning disability, speech and language, and emotional disturbance, because with those disabilities, the definition does not really align with the definition for most significant cognitive disability. Another thing that we do as part of our oversight with our LEAs is we look at red flag data. And so we started this back in 2019. At that point, we were looking at primary disability, placement in the gen ed classroom, reading level with comprehension, computation skills. So we look at addition, subtraction, using numerals, not calculators at the elementary level, and then multiplication and division at the secondary level, writing skills, and then performance level on the DLM. We made some changes with that. So this past school year, we went ahead and sent that information out in the spring. We continue to look at the primary disability and assign a red flag to SLD, ED, and speech and language. The reading level with comprehension, the reason why we look at that is on the DLM, on the text that's provided, even at the high school level, those texts are really written at more of a first grade level. I've been an item writer for DLM for several years, and we are to avoid two-syllable words and above. So one of the testlets that's out there, the story at the 10th grade level, in the first 6 pages, when I have directors ask me about that, there was one two-syllable word in that story, and it was the word little. So if you've got a student that's actually reading with comprehension at a 2nd to 3rd grade level, is this an appropriate and challenging test for your student? Same thing with the computational skills. So we look at that. With writing, when we first started doing this, we found that we had several students, I think it was around 123, that were writing paragraph length text using spelling. So if they're creating paragraph length text using spelling, is this the most appropriate challenging test for the student? So we send that information to districts. Another thing that we implemented in, I believe it was 2020, was 3 levels of technical supports, or a tiered system. So we have those universal supports, which includes online training and tools that are available to all districts. And then, of course, all districts that test over 1% do the justifications and the assurances. The assurances technically are only required for those states that are submitting a waiver, but we've already got it into the kiosk system. So we're just going to leave it in there because I think they're good assurances that it's important that states are, or districts are, following the state participation guidelines. The targeted technical assistance, for the districts that are assigned that, we do have a required DLM training that appropriate staff need to participate in. We also review the district's data with them. And then we had the districts submit student information sheets to KSDE. We reviewed those and did a deep data dive with the district's core team that they developed. And then they went ahead and developed a plan from that. With those districts that were on intensive technical support, we did all of those things. But we also had the possibility of DLM test observations, and the DLM test observations were with the targeted as well. But during COVID, those first 2 years, we were doing this tiered system. We weren't in districts, so we weren't doing those observations. but we have implemented the observations. This year, I've been out to a few different districts already and have others scheduled. And then we're doing an on-site folder review. So we have an alternate assessment file review form. And so we go ahead and look through and see if there's anything that's kind of a red flag after digging into that data. If there's certain kids where that show up on that deep data dive, we ask specifically for those. But the ones that I've done so far, I just indicated, just pull 2 files from each building and we go through those. And it's been really helpful. I've been able to identify, oh, you know, this is something that you may really want to consider or look at. So that's what we're doing with that. Even though we do not have a waiver this year, we are continuing all the things identified in the plan to make sure we continue to stay under that 1%. And then this is my contact information. So if you have any questions, feel free to give me a call or send me an email.
Hi, Carrie, this is Marvin Miller. Can I ask a question? And can you hear me?
Okay, Marvin, go ahead.
Okay, Carrie, do you see the participation rates declining over the different grade bands? Are there more elementary than high school students taking the different DLM tests of the years? Are we seeing people phase off and move towards the general assessment?
We're gonna get the breaks. Yes. I am. We are seeing consistent changes, more so in the elementary, and part of that could be that we're really working with the districts that are on technical support. Let's look at those 3rd graders. If you've got 3rd graders that are reading, they probably don't have a most significant cognitive disability. The issue we have at the secondary level, if that student has taken an alternate assessment since 3rd grade and they're currently a 10th grader and they're still in a self-contained classroom, it's real hard to move those students. But I've had districts that have worked with me and said this student clearly, with the updated participation guidelines, does not meet the eligibility. I had one district that I worked with for 2 years on the same kiddo, and they ended up having a meeting with administration because administration, was really pushing this kid needs an alternate assessment. And they spent 2 hours going through the rubric we have, which is very specific on the 4 different criteria. And at the end of it, they kind of voted, and the administrator said, I get it. This kid is not eligible. And at that point, the student was an 11th grader. So they moved the student to the general assessment. And, because if they don't qualify, you can't give them an alternate assessment. Mm-hmm. So I worked with another district last month, and they said, the parent's an educator. And, what do we do? Parents really wanted that alternate. They really didn't feel the student qualified. And so I said, reach out to me. Let's talk some more, because even though we say that the student typically is 2.5 or more standard deviations below in intellectual functioning and adaptive behavior, if there's one of those subcategories where the student would be eligible, let's look at that. If that student truly needs an alternate assessment, let's not just go at the overall composite score. And what can we do to support that student if they are moving to a general assessment? A lot of the federal meetings I've been on, we've done a lot with that, because we've got these students as states have had to clean up their participation guidelines, and students are moving to the general. How are we supporting those students so that they can be successful?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
And Lena, I will go ahead. I think someone asked me on the states. I will go ahead and pull that. I've got that information, but it's not in here.
Okay, thank you so much, Carrie. If anybody has any other questions, please don't hesitate to reach out because I know personally, I have had my first high schooler qualify this year, and there's a lot of questions, and this is a very specific category that we want to make sure we're doing the right thing for kids and giving them what they need. So Carrie is definitely the go-to person, and she knows all the ins and outs of what we should be doing and why. I appreciate that. That was really good. We do have a change in schedule. Mark Ward jogged right over here when he was contacted, but I want to give him a second to catch his breath. And I know probably people at home are having coffee kicking in, and we all just need to take a little break. So we're going to take a 10-minute break. And then we're going to do some adjustments in the schedule. It also looks like Beth Foltz is not going to be able to be here today. So we're going to try and move her to our January meeting. And that means we may end up wrapping up a little bit early today. So we're going to go ahead and take a 10-minute meeting or 10-minute break, and then we'll get back to meeting shortly. Here's the mute. All right, welcome back. Let me get my volume turned up here. I have the privilege of having Mark sitting next to me right now. He's going to use my technology because we got a good computer volume for the whole room here. And we are coming back from break and going to hear from Mark Ward on IDEA due process.
All right, thank you. I apologize for those who are attending virtually. I didn't get these materials made until this morning. So Kayla said that she's going to send them to you electronically. But for those of you who are here, that top part where it says 34 CFR 300.514C, that's what we're doing today. The SEA is required to bring the due process hearing decisions to you. I'm not actually giving you those decisions. One is like 222 pages long, and it's a mess to read. It's not very readable at all. But we make these decisions available in redacted form, and you can find them there where it says KSDE and it has an arrow. If you go to the KSDE webpage and you click on legal, special education law, on the bottom of that page, you can find the decisions. And we have coded the decisions. So for instance, I've got 3 decisions here and I'll just briefly talk about them. 21 due process 001 is on that web page. You can see it was filed in August of 2020 and decided in July of 2021. These things take a long time, and the decisions are long. This is the one that's 222 pages. The parents were the prevailing party. It was appealed, and the review officer's decision was 148 pages. And it has now been appealed to the United States District Court. So it's left our jurisdiction. It's a child fine case. And if you look at the bold print, here's what the hearing officer found. 1, the district failed to properly evaluate the child. 2, failed to develop an appropriate IEP. 3, failed to implement the IEP that they did develop. Failed to provide an independent educational evaluation that was requested by the parent, and significantly impaired the parent's opportunity to participate in the decision-making process. And there was a lot of evidence about this. Basically, the school district violated every important part of the IDEA. And what was interesting is that the parents were requesting private school tuition. And this hearing officer denied that, even though he found against the school district on every issue. Instead, and you can see that, instead the order said that the student was to remain in the district schools, but with the services of a special education IEP specialist, a board certified behavior analyst, and an educational tutor, all to be paid for by the district, plus some ABA services. Neither side liked this. And that's why both of them appealed, and both of them to a review officer, then both of them appealed to the district court. So that's where that is. And I've lost track of what's going on there. Once it gets in district court, it's out of our jurisdiction. So I don't know what's going on with that. The second one, this was a little girl, 11 years old. She was deaf or profoundly hard of hearing, and she got some cochlear implants at age 2, but she never developed the ability to communicate verbally. And so one summer she spent she got some extended school year services and did that at the Kansas School for the Deaf. Parent liked that and asked for the school district to place her at the Kansas State School for the Deaf. That school denied that request. It went to due process, and the hearing officer said that the district had failed to provide this child with a free appropriate public education in order to the immediate enrollment in the school for the deaf. So there was another parent one. Now the third one, and all of these I've got up above them, when it was filed, when it was decided, the length of the decision, this is 167 pages. And again, the parent prevails on this. It's kind of odd. Historically, parents have not prevailed in these kinds of hearings, primarily because the school recognizes that it had a problem and it doesn't want to drag this through court, and they either resolve it. Not very many of these even go to hearing. Typically they're resolved, but when they go to hearing, usually it's because the school district has a strong case. In this case, this is the classic case of a failure to provide a free appropriate public education. You've got a child, and you can see in what I put in bold print, here's a child with escalating behaviors, declining educational or academic performance. Now he does have a Section 504 plan, but it's not working. And the teachers are complaining to the assistant principal, this kid won't do anything. And you can see in bold print, the assistant principal responded saying, quote, unfortunately, a lack of motivation isn't a disciplinary action, so I can't do much more than have a conversation, end quote. Meanwhile, the teachers were complaining. You've got a teacher saying he pays attention in class about 10% of the time. His effort is extremely low. He has completed 1 to 2 assignments the whole semester. Lately, he just sits in class and does nothing. These are school people reporting this to the assistant principal. And then it goes to court and they're testifying to this. So when I said it's a classic illustration of a failure to provide a free appropriate public education, recently one court put it this way. And before I say that, the FAPE standard set by the United States Supreme Court is that the school has to provide an IEP that's reasonably calculated to enable the child to make appropriate progress in light of their circumstances. And that language, an IEP reasonably calculated, is important because it means that when the IEP team is sitting there developing that IEP, it's a snapshot in time. They're looking forward with the information that they have. And so the Supreme Court says judges should not use the benefit of hindsight to second guess the IEP team. In other words, okay, we developed this IEP. The question is, what did we know when we developed the IEP? And with that knowledge, was the IEP reasonably calculated to provide educational benefit? But that doesn't protect the school district forever, because at a later time, the IEP team knows more. For one thing, it may know that this IEP is not working. How far does a school get to go is a question. But here, this was going on. A 504 plan, the staff was testifying as early as December 2019 that it just wasn't working for this student. And that's the thing, even though the IEP is reasonably calculated to look forward, it's a prospective as opposed to a retrospective view. At some point, the district has to do something. And one of the courts put it, a district cannot ignore a clearly failing IEP. When that happens, it has a duty to meet and at least try something. Another court said the failure to provide FAPE is when both sides are stagnating. The student's progress is stagnating, and what the school is doing about it is stagnating. That's when you have a problem. And that's exactly what was happening here. It's amazing that a district would go to due process when its own staff are testifying and have sent emails saying this isn't working, we have to do something. And they didn't even evaluate this child. So that's how that came out. Okay, that's pretty much my review of those cases. If you want to read them, it's really dry reading. But it's there. Anybody have any questions? Oh. Could you clarify about the second case you mentioned? Did KSD deny the student's placement, or the school district refused to recommend the child? Yeah, I think KSD was always willing to take that child. We haven't had due process, but we've had other disputes regarding the state schools and whether school districts were properly denying children's or families' requests to attend them.
That was a thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, if there's no other questions, then I think we ought to move on in the agenda.
Well, we always appreciate when Mark can come and make things not dry and cut to the chase and eliminate, I don't know, there was like 400 pages you mentioned that
Yeah,
we could read in our leisure
Yeah.
still. Yes.
I have to admit, I did not read all 444 pages. I was skimming that stuff.
Yes.
But it's dry, and it's one of those decisions where the hearing officer, every paragraph, he's got it numbered. He calls them findings of fact. Okay, I'm done.
Well, thank you, Mark. We really appreciate your time. Okay, so our next order of business is Shane Carter. Are you ready?
I am.
Okay, he is here. If you would like, I'll turn my volume down and then we can,
Okay, I was gonna say, or I've got my stuff, I can turn my microphone on, I think I've got. my
yeah, you
audio
turn your
muted
mic on and I'll turn mine down and then we won't be echoing each other. How about that?
Sounds great.
All right,
But let's see, I've got a.
but
knack
wait,
for
there's
breaking
more.
Technology, so let's see if I can do this. Well, can you hear me? What's that? Oh, okay, no, I can pull it up there to share my screen, or perhaps I can speak from here and have my slides up and share that with the group. Would that work?
We are gonna try that.
Okay. I like to make things complicated, so I roll.
No, we like to do modifications and accommodations at every level. So I'm gonna just let you talk into my computer. Go for it.
And is it possible to share my screen?
Can he share his screen?
Said it's disabled. Somebody stop. Okay, thank you. Well, talk about a smooth transition. All right, well, good morning, everyone. I am Shane Carter. I'm the Director of Teacher Licensure, and today I'm going to provide you a couple of updates. One, at your last meeting, I spoke about some vacancy data. So since the last meeting, we did collect this school year's, or this semester of the school year's vacancy data. So I'm going to provide you an update on that. And I'm also going to discuss a regulation update. Since the last meeting, we finally had a set of regulations that have been pending for about 5 years. Finally get approved. So we're in the process of finalizing those regulations. So I'll go into that as well. And then at the end, if you have any questions regarding licensure or anything in general, please feel free to ask. All right, so before we get into the vacancy data, I wanted to quickly give you an explanation for what a vacancy is as far as terms of collecting this data in our system. So one, a vacancy is any positions that's not filled. Number two, any vacancy that's filled by a person that's not properly endorsed. We'll break that out in a little more detail in just a moment, but people that aren't considered vacancies are substitute teachers that are filling in on a temporary basis. So let's say, for instance, someone's on extended sick leave, or a contracted teacher's on extended sick leave, or a maternity leave, something of that nature. There's a contracted teacher that actually fills that particular spot.
the substitute comes in and, works for a few weeks or whatnot. That is not considered a vacancy. Now, if a long-term sub is filling a position, there's not a contracted teacher that's actually hired for that position, then that is considered a vacancy. Other situations is an individual that's licensed for English language arts and they're teaching math, not appropriately licensed, we consider that a vacancy too, though there's a body there, not a body, an educator that's providing instruction. Not considered a vacancy as well. So many of you in this particular community deal with the waiver process. So if an individual is on a waiver, that's not counted as a vacancy. If an individual is in one of our non-traditional routes to the classroom and has one of those licenses, such as the TAP, limited apprentice license, or has a provisional license, restricted license, that's not considered a vacancy as well. Any questions on the definition of a vacancy before I move on? Okay, seeing none, I will continue. All right, so this is the actual data, and what you see before you start on the left-hand side. It's basically a year's worth of vacancy data that's collected. Starting in the upper left-hand corner, this is the top 5 vacancies, and historically, this top 5, since we've collected the data, has remained constant. So special education has continually been the #1 vacancy that we've experienced. Elementary followed in second. Our English language arts, math, and science, they kind of jockey in positions between 3, 4, and 5. Any given year, one may move up to 3rd or to 4th, but the top 5 has remained the same. So at this time last year, fall of 2021, it was reported that the state of Kansas had 269 special education vacancies. Whenever we collect the data in March as part of closing out the licensed personnel report for the school year, districts are required to go in and update their vacancy data. So one, they can update the positions that they've already added. And if they did fill a position, they'll go ahead and mark it as filled. And then as far as being filled, it gets broken down to even more information. That is it filled with someone that's appropriately licensed or not? If they filled a position with someone that's not appropriately licensed, that position continues to be a vacancy. So that filled number that you see, that individual wouldn't be collected here. So in the spring, we went from 269 vacancies, and then 347 of those vacancies were filled. But, oh, by the way, we ended up having an additional 305. So then we still have 305 special education vacancies as spring 2022. All right, fast forward to our collection of fall semester of 2022, which the collection stopped on September 26th. And this is what was reported by the districts. We had increased up to 385 vacancies. Now, one caveat I will put on this data is #1, it is self-reported by well, I'm going to put a couple of caveats on there. One, it's self-reported. 2, for special education, it's also collecting for the category that we have in our system, and we're going to work to get this broken out in a better manner. It collects all special education, high incidence, low incidence, gifted, deaf, hard of hearing, visually impaired, and also ESOL in these numbers. And at the current time, I don't have a way to differentiate which one, what the vacancy actually is. Is it deaf, hard of hearing versus high incidence? And before I move on, are there any questions on this data?
So these top 5, you might explain what the top 5 means.
Oh, okay. So we collect a series of positions. Basically, any teacher position is collected as part of this collection. And the top 5 is basically by frequency, how many, whoever had the most vacancies is included in the top 5. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. With my poor explanation there, so. All right, seeing no additional questions, I will go ahead and move on. And this is just a board district breakdown for each of these vacancy areas. And it's been pretty consistent that Board Region 5 has had the majority of our vacancies. And when you break it down into that particular board region from a pure numbers standpoint, districts such as Liberal, Garden City, and Dodge City over the last couple of years have been amongst the top 5 as far as vacancies reported. So no real change since we've started collecting data. That Board 5, which is a extremely large board region, pretty much all of Western Kansas is included in there. So you would expect the numbers to be a little higher, but I'll take a moment, Is there any additional questions on this particular piece of data? No, seeing none, I will continue on. All right, so I mentioned regulations update. So at the beginning, towards the end of September, we finally received the regulations back from the Attorney General's office. After that process, the regulations updates were published for public hearing. In October 18th, the General Counsel and myself went to the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules and Regulations and gave an update about the regulations. And currently, we're waiting for the December board meeting once the public hearing piece will close and the board will vote on implementing these particular regulation updates. Now, I just geared, there's more updates that are part of the regulation update, but I wanted to gear it specifically to this audience for the special education changes that are coming down. So I'll start with the first one, which is special education generalist high incidence. That particular endorsement will be changed to secondary education unified. And I made the mistake of saying in public that I didn't think any university would want to participate in this program because of how difficult it would be to implement. And then 2 days later, a university contacted me and said, we would like to start this program. Can you provide some more information? So I want to quickly clarify what this is compared to our other unified licenses, because it is different and it is going to be confusing. So when the group got together to make this change and create this program, it's geared towards high incidence special education at the secondary level. Now, most of our unified licenses, you think of the elementary K-6 unified, it covers core content mesh, math, English, science, history, government, social studies. This license will not. It's set up for math instruction and English language arts. So potentially when an individual comes out of this program and is ready for a license, she or he would be licensed to provide high incidence support services and then also provide math and English instruction. Okay. Okay. Any questions or comments on that?
Hey, Shane, this is Marvin Miller. I do have a question on that. So does that mean they would have to take and get an endorsement in social studies and science if they were to be the teacher of record?
Yes,
for
sir.
any special ed?
Yes, sir. So if they were
Okay.
teaching any of the science, so this is where it gets a little difficult and why this particular endorsement it's kind of confusing and would be difficult to implement. If you start taking a look at our science breakdown, if an individual wanted to be licensed appropriately to teach all the science courses, they would have to add biology, earth, space science, physics, chemistry. I may have forgotten something there, but anyway, they'd have to take each of those or either complete or either complete a program or add them by testing those endorsements to be licensed appropriately. So I think that's why whenever the discussions were set up for this particular endorsement, they geared it towards math and English.
Yep. And remind me as well, they would have to be endorsed at the high school level or the middle school level to teach those special ed high school classes?
Yeah, so the high school would be secondary level, unless there is, if an individual is determined that they are significantly below grade level, it is set up that we check for licensure at that next lower level. So what that means is, let's say you had a ninth grader that was reported as significantly below grade level. If that educator had the middle level endorsement for math, they could teach math at this to that particular student. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Any other questions on the special education generalist? No. Okay. The director of special education. So I have a email from May 13th or May 15th of 2021 that's on my desk, and it's been there ever since I've occupied my particular office. And in that, I believe this group determined that they were not in favor for the director of special education endorsement. So I just wanted to run that through and make sure that that's a true
I
statement.
was on that
Okay.
committee.
Okay,
That's
so
true.
excellent. Okay, so what I'm working through is trying to determine how we remove this from getting put in the regulation. Now, even if it ends up in the regulation, it doesn't mean that I've already talked to our program, our universities and they know that this group is not in favor of this. So they would have to go through the program process to get it approved. And I think they're clear that we're not supporting that. So they wouldn't start or initiate that. So though it may be in reg, we just wouldn't implement it. But I am trying to find out how we can, if we can remove it from going to the board. As these regulations were processing, over many, many years, we couldn't go back and make an edit and pull it out because it stopped the process. And, we could potentially be about
5 years.
5 years on down the road and still not made any progress on this. So I am aware, I'm in favor of it, and we will work to make sure there's no confusion and think that this special education director endorsement program is something that the state of Kansas wants to pursue.
Okay,
Marvin, did you have a
Shane,
question?
this is Mark. Someone else go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was just asking if you had a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, I did. And Bert, this might be for you. So this will sit there because I've been on SEAC now for 8 years. And so the group of special ed administrators that were on SEAC 5 years ago really wanted this. The group of special ed administrators last year didn't want this. So it could easily change in 2 more years. So does this just sit there in case the opinions in the field changes then? It could be moved forward at that time?
Well, yes, if it's in the regulation, then at any time it could be moved forward and implemented.
So if Casey and SEAC comes back in 2 years and say, hey, we really do think this is a good idea, we don't have to go through the regulatory hurdle anymore. It would just be the universities developing a program.
Correct.
If they chose.
Yes, sir.
I just wanted to say that, from what I remember of that discussion, Marvin, correct me if I'm wrong, but this sounds like a weird thing for SEAC to not support, but the discussion at that time was that it was a fear that individuals who never had worked as educators in the special education field would just go get that licensure and then be able to be a SPED director. And instead, the way it is now, where the licensure is the same for this, I guess, like superintendent and SPED or building principal and SPED, depending on which one you're talking about, you just get the license, but yet the way you get into the SPED positions basically is by having that background, and that's why they choose you for that. I want to explain that for people who are new to the team, and Marvin, correct me if I'm wrong, but it just seems like just mentioning this seems like a very odd thing for this group not to have supported.
Right. And that's why the group 5 years ago supported it, but different people have different opinions. So, and and there were different reasonings at the time 5 years ago than the fear of last year. So, that's why it is interesting. It's strange. If people really want to dig into it, go back to the minutes 5 or 6 years ago and figure it out. But, yeah. So thanks, Jennifer.
Marvin, I was on that committee, and I do know that Jennifer and you are both right in what you're saying. There was conversations that went in both directions. I'm sorry, I'm going to turn this a second. No, one of the topics that came up was, would it be a district level license or is it a building administration license? And should it be district level pay, since special ed directors are typically overseeing multiple sites and not just one building. And so they wanted clarification because there's pay attached to that. And do you become responsible for your special ed budget as opposed to the district superintendent controlling the special ed budget? They wanted much more definition put into that because those are accounting classes and different classes that they wanted universities to offer if you're going to be at the district level as opposed to the building level.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
there's just a lot of clarification that wasn't in there. And I think that was the biggest reason it probably wasn't supported. But I know that with the shortage we have now, I agree with you. If we came back to the table, it could be a much different conversation. So that might be something we want to look at again, if it is needed.
And I do think some of it went between people that were within districts and people who ran co-ops, saw different needs.
Yep.
Well, I personally appreciate the background as I'm going through these regulations started many years ago, and a lot of the changes that were made we've had such turnover between people retiring, people off the committee that was once serving on that particular committee. So thank you for the background as well.
Well, one comment, And it's possible, Lena, that Casey could take this up and take a look at this and see what position they want to take, because I know that he was very strong-willed in not pushing this forward.
Mhm.
So it could be that Casey feels like they want to do this.
I'm gonna jump on and speak to that. Yeah, Bert, Casey may have a position on this that's changed since, I'll be honest. The position of SEAC in the past doesn't reflect my personal opinion of it. And I do want to clarify, we do have special ed directors who have never had experience in special ed,
And Keith
period.
was one of them.
And they maybe came from a classroom setting or a principal setting or a superintendent setting, but never once did a thing in special ed and are now running special ed departments, co-ops, or interlocals. So that does happen, which makes it a concern that we don't have, any kind of requirement beyond a single class in a district leadership program in special education. So I'll take that back to Casey exec board, and if they want to study it, I would love to find the history and the conversations from SEAC in the past as well. I think that'll be useful for the KC group.
Any other questions or comments? No. Okay, well, I'll go ahead. I'll move on to the pre-kindergarten. Now, during the last update I provided in September, we did go over the pre-K unified licenses, what each of those endorsements meant, but I just wanted to go back and touch on pre-kindergarten again. So if an individual has elementary K-6 unified license, she or he would be licensed appropriately to provide general content to 3 and 4 year olds, however, would not be licensed appropriately to provide support services because the unified program, as far as the program standards are set up, didn't have a pre-K portion or a standard included in it. Now in the future, that doesn't mean a university may not go and relook and see if adding a pre-K standard in there and changing the program, that's a possibility. And then they would be licensed appropriately to provide those support services and general content. But as of now, the same policy that was put into place in 2015, anyone that has that K-6 endorsement or the pre-K endorsement can provide general content instruction only for 3 and 4 year olds. Any questions on that?
We have a couple items in the comments. It says, do we have these slides? And I believe that we're going to get those sent out. Kayla's shaking her head yes. And then Carrie Haig said that KSD cannot implement a reg just because someone doesn't like it. So I think that was good clarification. Carrie, did you want to speak more on that?
Just that if there's a regulation that's in effect, KSDE has a statutory responsibility to implement regulations. So we just can't act like it doesn't exist. Well, we have to do something.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have to.
So right, but so I'll put it this way. It can exist, but until a university decides to put a program together and request to do that, it'll just exist in the background. And bottom line, who it would help is individuals coming from like Missouri, where they have a director of special education. We could now add that endorsement to a license because it exists. But as far as preparing Kansas educators until the program standards are developed, and if no one's in support of that, a university is not going to pick up and develop those program standards. So does that help clarify?
Okay, so an in-state program. I see what you.
Correct. Yes, ma'am.
And so Shane, clarify me, correct me if I'm wrong. I believe we have some other programs that SEAC endorsed and went through regulations that no universities have ever picked up. Is that true?
Correct. And a great example of that is the special education generalist high incidence that was developed, I want to say around 2014, 15-ish. And then
yes, that's about right. That's right.
So that's an example of one.
Thank you, Shane. That helps clarify that for me.
Okay, you're welcome. Any other questions or comments? Nope. Moving on. This is just questions in general, anything related to licensure. No, not seeing any. Well, I appreciate your time. If you do ever have any questions about licensure, please don't hesitate to reach out to me and I'll get your response. Thank you all.
Shane, Dr. Kurth has a question.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Sorry, I don't know if you can hear me. I've got,
We can hear you.
sorry, I've got work going on in my house, so it's just really loud. So I was trying to use the chat, but I think as a university faculty, we don't always know what the options are to pursue. And so I just wonder how, that's communicated. I'm at the University of Kansas, but I'm, one person and there's lots of other universities. And so, we might be interested in pursuing things, but we don't know what the options are.
Yeah. So as far as these reg updates, what I've done, there's a couple of different venues that I have the opportunity to speak with our higher ed partners. One is we have unit head licensure officer meetings. Traditionally, those were set up on a semi-annual basis. However, we've changed it to having a topic where it's basically almost monthly. We'll get together. So I've updated the group, and that unit head licensure officer, that is the deans of the School of Education or assistant deans, the representatives, and also the licensure officers that process applications at the university level or are the audience of that meeting. I also meet with CapCoat, that is our private institutions, kind of think of their board of regents, if you will, kind of their like a managing body of individuals that get together. And I provide updates. So I've shared with each of those groups the full regulation updates. In addition, once these regulations are finally approved and implemented, if that happens, I'll send out summaries basically to the field of what the changes are. And that would include our partners at higher ed would have, and they've requested to get some type of summary for that. So we will be sending that out. Does that help?
Yeah, it does. I think it just is clear that maybe our administration is not telling us, passing things along for those of us who make these program changes, because it is up to faculty to request those.
Yeah, but also keep in mind, I mean, this was kind of in a holding pattern for so long, and now we're in that 60-day window. And most of our unit heads at our KBOR institutions, we had a meeting last week. That was the first time that they were able to hear this. It just so happened when I was speaking to Cape Coat, like the day before, that we actually got word back that the regulations were approved from the Attorney General. So it's been kind of a slow process as far as putting information out, but I can't really put anything out yet until the board votes and we know it's official, because there's always the possibility that something could be changed once that process happens. Okay. Well, once again, thank you all for your time.
Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much, Shane. There's so many different entities that play a role, which is, it's in some ways refreshing, because we know that when something is put in place, it's been vetted. We've done the due diligence. We're trying to do what's best for every Kansas kid, but the processes sometimes seem slow. And when we're in a shortage of teachers right now, we would like things to be faster so we can put good people in the seats so that we can make sure we're providing for the needs of every Kansas kid. So I appreciate all your hard work, and it seems like the process goes slow, and then once the Board of Education gets it, you got 60 days go.
Yeah.
So it's slow, and then it's really better get on it. So hopefully the communication will get better, Jenny. I understand that sounds like a frustration. So hopefully we can find ways to get that information out to everyone clearly. I am looking at my schedule, and it looks like even though we did some jumping around, we've covered everyone that was on the agenda for today. So I think it's okay if you guys want to jump into the ex officio member reports. And we would start that one with families together. Leslie, are you ready?
I can be ready. I probably won't share my screen because I'm actually working on it and I don't have all the data ready for you guys. But I have some of it ready. So I'll just, a couple things I will update you on. One being that I don't know if everyone knows that we received some of the relief funds from the Kansas State Department of Education. I think I mentioned that on the last call. And so I want to let everyone know that we have hired some new people with those funds. One of those persons is Lacey Reamer, and she worked with us previously and has been touching base with me every now and again to see if we have anything. So it was great to be able to say, yes, actually, I do have something. And she has really hit the ground running. She is one of our IEP mentors. And so as such, she is doing a lot of individualized assistance with families. And I can tell you, it's really made a difference. I will start adding all of that to the report. And so that will be new on the report so that you all can see what we're doing with those dollars. And so I'll actually separate those because we are tracking all of that separately so that we can say, hey, these are the numbers that are directly because of that funding, which we're grateful for, especially for the families, because I can tell you, Lacey has been so busy and she's really making a difference already. We do have a job opening in Wichita for someone who will be doing the same type of work. Lacey is focusing on birth through 12-year-old, so families that include kids those ages. And then the Wichita position will focus on families that have transition aged kids. So, and we look at 13 because we want to start talking about that at least at age 13. So 13 and up on that one. The other person who we have is Lisa Howell. And she actually was on she worked on our education advocate program, but she has moved over. She was very interested in the new project that we have related to kids in foster care. So Lisa is the person that's working on that new project. And so her focus will be kids 14 and up, or probably 13 and up, that are in foster care. And so she'll be really working, not only doing the kind of work that we do under the IEP mentor program, but she will also have an added piece to that where she will help look at credits and making sure that we're capturing all the credits and where kids are at on credits. You know, that's typically something we don't delve into a lot, but we're going to be doing that with this group because it's just very important, as we all know. So those people have really hit the ground running, and we do have more people that we'll be hiring with some of those dollars. So I just wanted to let you guys know that you'll be seeing that on the reports as well. And you'll also see, I always like to kind of highlight where I've seen increases in our mental health numbers. When I say that, you know, the report, if you might remember, that it usually lets you know what content of contact areas that we're touching on the highest. I usually give you the top 20. So mental health is not in that top. Well, it actually is. I'm looking at this now because I have that other areas of interest. It actually moved up to the top 20 this time. So we're continuing to see an increase in that. And I know that you guys probably all know this as well. Lots of behavior calls, suspension and expulsion calls have really gone up this time. So yeah, just keeping really busy. We did do our numbers, and we are very much exceeding our goals as far as how many parents that we're working with, and which is fine, but we're filling it, I guess. So again, very happy to have some new people to help. I was in DC at the end of last month. We had our national conference that brought together the parent training and information centers, as well as the family health information centers, and our OSET project officers joined us for that. So that was a great event. And I guess I will just brag on Families Together and all of the great team that we have, because my project officer told me that we have a very strong center and that he doesn't get to have that conversation with every center. And so I'll just put it out there that was good for us to hear, because we really do try to work hard and work collaboratively. So one of the things that we are changing is we usually do an annual statewide conference. And I know I talked with you guys about it the last SEAC meeting, I did visit with him. We just are not getting the impact number wise for the amount of money that we're spending. And so I did get permission from him to switch up our PTI grant a little bit. And we are going to add instead 1 and possibly 2 team empowerment conferences. And those are we call them our techs, because everything has to have an acronym. But those techs, we collaborate with school districts to do that. And so that has been very successful. We've always done at least one, but instead of doing the statewide conference, we feel like we'll have a bigger impact with families. And we can still bring in speakers, we can do things, but we'll be working collaboratively with school districts. So if any of you would like to reach out to me, I would love it if someone wants us to work together on a future tech. I know we've worked with KCK, we've worked with Derby, we've worked with Western Kansas. So yeah, just know that if it's something that sounds interesting to anyone, please just reach out. And again, I'm sorry, I usually, I don't know, you know how it is, we're always doing things at the last minute. So I will get that done and get it sent to Kayla, and I will get the report so that you guys can see those numbers. And I also just want to say, I know some of you, and even some on this call, have referred families to us. So we're on this meeting, and I appreciate that very much. We appreciate that you recognize us as being people that are, you know, I guess I've just been around so long that I remember the day when the last thing a special education director would do is refer to families together. So it feels really good to have those referrals coming in. And any questions for me?
All right, Leslie, I'm not seeing any right now. I do remember back in the day, 25 years ago, that I'd have a meeting and people felt like they could threaten you, like, I'm inviting families together. And I said, oh, please do, because I knew the value of what you do. You guys are very important, and having you on a team brings just so many more resources to a student. So I'm so glad that that is like translating widely, because you guys do great work.
Well,
so thank you.
Thank you. And thank you to Lindsay also, and to all of you. So I appreciate it. And to me, it's like, I always say it's a true partnership, because I feel confident enough, and I think all of our team does, that we don't always agree on everything. I mean, typically we do kind of agree with most of you all, but there are times where we don't agree when we're at those meetings, because we see something, differently. And we know that we have the respect of people, that it's okay to disagree when you're working for a common goal. So thank you for that.
Sometimes disagreement brings better arrangements down the road, because we have really robust conversations and we realize everybody at the table is passionate. So that's not a bad thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you.
Definitely. Thank you. I'm going to tell you the next tech issue we're going to have is my computer just told me my battery's about to run out. So I don't have a cord for my computer. I charged it. Who knows what happened? The next person that we have as our ex officio member is Ashley Enns.
Hello. I was about to say good afternoon, because that's when I was planning on presenting this information, but I was kind of in the same boat as Leslie, where I was like, oh, okay, need to put all of the bullet points that I had down into something you guys can actually read. So I'll put in the chat here a link, but I'll also share that with Kayla, so those who are present in person have that copy when the materials go out. I wanted to highlight tomorrow, the Kansas Special Committee on Education is holding a public hearing on special education funding. And that has been a top priority for KC the last couple years. I think I got muted. Did you hear all of that?
We did hear it.
Okay,
Kayla's currently saving the day yet again. She has a charger for my computer. I'm using her charger. I swear the girl has a superwoman cape. Okay. So Kayla's now back at her computer. Were you needing her to give you permission to share your screen?
No, I don't need to. I put it in the chat for everyone. I think I muted myself somehow. That's what I was concerned. So So tomorrow we do have the KC Legislative Committee, as well as some superintendents, special education directors, and other folks are going to be at the Capitol. We're also inviting patrons, parents, and those who are interested in advocating for fully funding special education in Kansas to attend or to write letters. The document that I've shared with you guys has all of the information on where it is. So it's at the Capitol from 8 to 4. You can come and go. You can also watch it on a live stream, and that link is there too. There's also a link to a parent letter. So it was the letter really goes into detail about why we support fully funding special education, which again, kind of sounds funny to say to this group. Of course, we want to provide fund special education 100% or at the rate we're supposed to. I gave a little background information. So special education is supposed to, statute says that the state is supposed to fund special education at 92%. And that's never been the case. We've usually hovered around that 70 to 80% or even lower than that. And those excess costs are what basically we're saying a student who has an IEP requires services that cost more than students who don't have an IEP because they're not receiving those services. So when we don't have the full funds in order to provide that, it doesn't mean we don't provide services to students. It means that those funds come from our general fund instead. And so it affects the whole school district as opposed to just thinking of it in isolation as a special education kind of concern. So it does affect everyone. And I think our big concern is that the gap continues to grow. And when COVID money goes away next year, that's going to be even larger if the legislature doesn't take action. So that's the real focus for tomorrow. Definitely read into the materials. The legislative committee put together some great things that give some good background on all of that if you're interested in hearing more. We did talk a little bit about it last year, I think, too. One estimate that we got said that if we were fully funded at 92%, that we would have about $7,700 per fully enrolled student with special or with an IEP. So for some school districts like my own, that's millions of dollars that we can be using to continue to support our students that can also not be taken away from our general fund so that we can do a lot more with that. And I think everyone's facing budget cuts. I know we can calculate that into the number of teachers. I think one of the directors out in Western Kansas in Hayes had said, this equals 22 teachers that I can hire tomorrow if we have the applicants. So it does make a difference in the services that we're able to provide to students with special needs who have IEPs. And so we're really, really advocating for that to be fully funded. I think that's kind of what I wanted to touch on. I don't have any other updates. I'm happy to take any questions. But again, the materials have a lot of the background information if you're interested in learning about that.
I think the picture you just painted was I know the information, but it's always eye-opening for me because I know that we have kids. I'm in secondary. We've got to be putting kids out into job forces, and we've got to get them experiences and exposures. And think of the job coaches. Think at all the transition coordinators. I mean, there's just so many dominoes that we could start from birth all the way up till our 23-year-olds that just walked out of the school, and now hopefully they're in jobs and calling us back and telling us thank you for all the support. There's just so many opportunities for us to engage better. So
it really does kind of give you chills when you think about, wow, what could we be doing even above and beyond what we're required to do technically. And I think that that's an exciting idea if we can get to that point.
Yes, and when we say Kansas believes every child can succeed, we really need to back it and not just say it. So if they don't want to support it, maybe we should challenge them with, then what shall our motto be? If it can't be that,
new slogan.
Yeah, new slogan. All right. Okay, next on our agenda. Thank you so much, Ashley. That was great.
Thank you.
Do we have Rocky Nichols or
Mike is here?
Oh, Mike. Hi, Mike.
Howdy. Sorry, I was having trouble at the beginning of the meeting. I missed the beginning of the meeting trying to find the Zoom link. For whatever reason, I couldn't, but Kayla came through. So
Yeah, we all had several technical difficulties. We started late and we just like rock stars are ending early. So I appreciate you jumping on now and we'll let you take the floor.
All right. So, gosh, there's been a lot happening, especially as it relates to the home and community-based services waivers and looking at services, a number of things around transition, some efforts around supported decision-making. So I'll just kind of try and walk through those quickly, just some of those things that I think SEAC members would be interested in. So I think we've talked about it before, but KU was one of, I think, only a handful to receive, and I believe this one is a 5-year grant. They've had a number of different grants that have been really exciting that either impact either supported decision-making or transition. And so with this particular grant, and I'm blanking on the name of it, they're supporting transition councils across the state. And it's been really exciting to kind of to watch that process. I'm just on a number of folks who are on their steering committee, kind of monitoring what, and excited about the work that they're doing. But they were hoping to support 3 to 5 transition councils. They ended up having 8 applicants and are working with 8 across the state, which is really exciting. And so they're in the process of doing some really cool resource mapping. I shouldn't say cool, really useful, because cool is kind of a throwaway word, but really useful resource mapping. And so it's exciting just to see that resurgence of work within the transition councils, and exciting to kind of see where that leads. This year, there was also kind of some, at least in recent times, unprecedented discussion with a legislative intercommittee around IDD waiver modernization. Because as most of you are probably aware, our IDD waiver currently serves around 9,000 individuals, and we have more than 4,800 on the waiting list, and that's a new high. So when the folks signed up for the waiver, 7 or 8 years ago, they were told, yeah, expect a 7 to 8 year wait. Well, that's up to 10 years. And actually, in practicality, it's a crisis list, because the vast majority of slots are going to people in crisis, not people whose slot on the waiting list has come up. And that's not the right way to help people. It's not cost effective. It's not good for the individuals. It's not good for their families. It's not good for providers who have a very limited time. It's not good for choice. I mean, it's higher costs, worst outcomes. And so we had a lot of stakeholders. Legislators met for 3 days, and then there were a number of kind of roundtable meetings in between, and had some good discussion. And it was kind of really steered towards the idea of creating a community supports waiver. And so it would be, so right now we have one IDD comprehensive waiver. The idea would be to create another waiver, and a lot of states have multiple waivers to serve populations. And what the community sports waiver would be a lower cost option, ideally with some new and innovative services like individual budget authority across services, hopefully include transportation. In the discussion ended up, it would be capped at around $20,000, although some services like hopefully supported employment and transportation might be not included in that cap. But essentially, it would be an option for folks who need a variety of things other than residential, because that's typically the highest cost service. And so, there are a number of folks who don't need the full-blown comprehensive waiver, but they're using one of those slots today. And then obviously, there are a lot of folks on the waiting list who need comprehensive. So the idea would be, if we can create this new thing that will better meet the needs. There might be some folks on the comprehensive waiver who move over, but it'll also be kind of a way to help serve a chunk of folks on the waiting list. And so I'm oversimplifying this, so I'm sorry, but hopefully that kind of makes sense and gives you a little bit of background on it. There's several big things that have to happen first. So Kansas, for the last 10 years, has had an 1115 waiver, which is the waiver authority for our Medicaid program. And it's kind of designed to do experimental things but it has some strings and some limitations. And so the Kansas Department of Health and Environment has had discussions with CMS, and they're really kind of trying to steer Kansas into a different authority, and that would be a 1915B waiver. So functionally, for most of us, it wouldn't look any different. It's just different paperwork, kind of an oversimplification, different paperwork and different authority that the state would fill out with CMS. But that has to happen first. Then they would potentially write a new waiver and submit that to CMS. So we're still a couple years out from any of this coming to fruition, which is frustrating for folks on the waiting list today, and those of us who've advocated and watched the waiting list grow and grow. So we're hoping to kind of create some interest in funding some additional slots on both the IDD waiting or waiver, the physical disability waiver, where there's also waiting list, and then kind of one of the biggest challenges is just the autism waiver, where it's limited to 65 slots, provides a handful of services, and there's 428 families, most of which are not ever going to make it to be served. Their son or daughter will age out before they're even able to receive services, and so that is another issue. And granted, there's a challenge with the availability of services, but the kicker is for those 65 individuals, if they're on a waiver, parental income is deemed, meaning that parental income isn't considered. And that's a big barrier today for receiving services under EPSDT, which definitely impacts schools as well. Because I know a lot of schools bill for Medicaid services under EPSDT. So trying to figure out a good answer to make more of those individuals eligible. I mean, and the other big issue is like an interesting thing that came out in this discussion too is, so while individuals on the waiting list, if they're eligible for Medicaid, they'll have Medicaid. But the issue is 30% are not eligible. And that's more than likely because of parental income. And those individuals are not then eligible to receive. So if they're under 21, they're not eligible for EPSDT or other state plan services such as targeted case management. And so that 30%, they miss out on that kind of navigator function to help, the non-Medicaid services. There are a number of community sports and other things, benefits that these families, because, in a sense, they don't have that service, that navigator function, are not, they're missing out on some of those other things. So lots of good discussion. There's, I think, general consensus that people don't like the basis. And so I think there will be a renewed push to move us to either the MFEI or look at the SIS, but to move to a strengths-based assessment as opposed to the basis. So, all right, a lot of discussion there. Other things are personal care attendants. There's a crisis there, like in many things, but the types of jobs without benefits and low pay and unusual hours are hardest to fill. And so we have some waiver. The IDD waiver got a 25% rate increase. FE waiver, the frail elderly waiver, got a 10%. So there's inequities in between the different waivers as far as what those PCA rates. So somebody may make a different wage depending upon which client they're working for, if they have multiple clients. And then the targeted case management rate hasn't been touched since, I think, 2007. And so there's an effort to increase that rate again, because there's counties where we don't have enough targeted case managers even, so that service is not available everywhere. Another exciting thing, the state of Kansas, with part of their COVID money, the enhanced FMAP, they're doing a waiting list study over the next 18 months or so. They had to put it to a competitive bid. KU, that you said, won it, and they're working with several different, because it's not just studying the IDD waiting list, they're studying all waiting lists. And so it'll be really exciting as that comes out, because right now, especially on the IDD waiting list, we just don't know that much about the needs. Somebody who was deemed, found functionally eligible 10 years ago, their needs might have evolved a lot over 10 years. And there's just so much that we don't know about them. There's also an Employment First supported employment project that they're currently developing the scope of work, but that will be moving to a procurement hopefully here in the next month or two. Hopefully, I guess I'm not sure the timeline, But that will be exciting to look at really moving the needle on employment first. And again, I think that's something that SEAC members would be really interested in. Obviously, then moving on to another thing, the final settings rule, March 2023 is right around the corner. And that's when that CMS final settings rule that specifies essentially that Medicaid funding has to be used in the community and can't be used in settings that isolate. And so a lot of work has been going on for the last 7 years on that front, but the date is coming. And so obviously we're watching that. And then a lot of effort around supported decision-making. So I appreciate all of the SEAC members who are working and interested in moving that forward. We're likely going to have a bill again this coming session for the act, but the great news is that our existing statutes allow for supported decision-making and encourage. They just don't call it supported decision-making. And so it can be used without a signed agreement with the additional protections and benefits that the Supported Decision-Making Agreements Act has. But we're trying to do a lot of efforts in different areas. Like DRC is we're going to look at creating a CLE, an ethics CLE for attorneys to educate them on alternatives to guardianship. We've been doing a lot of outreaches in hospitals and other healthcare settings. We're going to do some efforts with the judicial system, and then obviously just educating whatever you all can help with too, in educating the transition teams as well as families about these different opportunities and alternatives to guardianship. That's going to be huge. And then I'm missing today. There's today and tomorrow. There's a sequential intercept model work group that's going to be developing recommendations. And so they're hoping to create some additional resources. And I'm not super familiar with the sequential intercept model, but in a nutshell, it's an attempt to try and divert, especially when we look at youth with disabilities from justice involvement. And so the idea would be to try and tier the services and resources as folks, and get them to them sooner, identify and get them to them sooner so they can prevent justice involvement. So that's just a handful of kind of a lot of the exciting things that are happening. And sorry to talk so long. And Trish, I'm very glad that Kayla came through and gave you because your battery probably would have died about halfway through that long update. So.
No, that's okay. It sounds like you guys have irons in all the fires right now. So it's a lot of information, but it's nice to know that your office is supporting so many different people in so many different places. And it's just needed work. You are being asked to do a lot, probably with a very little. So we appreciate.
I didn't even talk about voting. We're going to do a lot of work, hopefully, too, on improving the accessibility of voting. We have two glaring processes right now. So advanced voting by mail is not fully accessible. So if you have an individual who is blind or visually impaired, in all likelihood, they cannot vote by mail without assistance. And that's a clear violation of federal law. And then in most places, I believe the provisional voting process, if you're at a polling place, an individual who's blind or visually impaired most likely would not be able to vote without assistance there, which is also a violation of federal law. So we are trying to work with a lot of folks to try and improve that. So it doesn't have to be hard, but we do have to change the processes and change the policies and practices to bring that to fruition, to make that fully accessible.
Well, Mike, as I was voting in Silver Lake, right down the street from us yesterday, I saw that they had an accessible station where they could put headphones on and they could read it to them. And I was like, I wonder if Mike Burgess has been involved in setting up the voting polls here today. So.
Thank you. Federally, they're required. I mean, that's been a requirement for a while. And like in Shawnee County, we've complied with that for a long, long time. I was frustrated because somebody sat down at that station right before me because I prefer voting electronically anyway, because it makes it, you can't unintentionally undervote that way. Often people forget the backside. I mean, there were 33 questions on our ballot. And so it's a lot easier when you do that electronically to verify that. But yes, that is a great thing. Unfortunately, they don't have those that they can send home with somebody, so they can't vote in a fully accessible way at home.
Yet.
Yet, yes. Other states have solved that.
Yep, we got to
But
follow
hopefully we
what
get
other
Kansas.
states are doing ahead of us.
Yeah.
Figure out what they're doing and try and make it happen in Kansas.
Yeah.
All right, so Kansas Board of Education, do we have anybody for updates? So I haven't heard or seen Jim pop on. Have you heard from him, Kayla? Okay, so anything else that we need to, anybody else ex officio? I don't know if we have anybody from the state schools today.
We're going January.
Okay, I do believe in January they're going to be able to attend. So I know we've added them in, and that's kind of a short turnaround before the first meeting. So hopefully we'll hear from them in January. It looks like, according to our agenda, we are ready for somebody to make a motion to adjourn.
This is Lena, and I'd make that motion.
Okay.
Marvin Miller, I'll go ahead and second that.
Okay, so Lena made the motion, Marvin seconded, and Kayla's gonna send us a poll. Okay, it looks like our motion has been approved, and I will just close with a reminder that our next meetings will be January 10th and 11th. And I look forward to seeing everybody, hopefully here in Topeka. We can get a lot of work done and get some more updates about all the success and progress we're making in Kansas. You guys have a great rest of the day.
Are we staying on here for membership committee? Or is there a new link or are we? Yeah, stay here. Okay.
We can do.
Let's rearrange that since Tobias can't be with us today.
Yeah, I don't know if you could, Jennifer, I don't know if you could hear Bert, but Tobias can't be with us today. So he said, let's rearrange that.
Okay. All right. Just want to make sure. Thanks.
Okay, thanks for
Bye.
the reminder. Okay.